Okay, so we're still in the Apostles' Creed. We come to the part of the Apostles' Creed where it says Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to the dead. So let's talk about suffering. Let's talk about the fact that Jesus himself did not get an exemption on suffering. Jesus, the only perfect human being, the only sinless human being, the only innocent human being who has ever lived, was not exempt from suffering in this human life. I'm always perplexed that Christians are surprised by suffering when the cross, that emblem of suffering and shame, is at the center of our faith, and literally in the center of most of our churches. And yet Christians act as if suffering was somehow foreign or strange, or somehow indicated a deficiency of faith. In fact, there are some prosperity gospel people on TV, some name it, claim it, some of the new apostolic movement people who will say that if you're suffering, if you're struggling in some way, it's because you do not have enough faith. If you've gone through a divorce, got cancer, child gets sick and dies, it's because you do not have enough faith. Now, I find that egregious. I find that egregious because not only did Jesus suffer, but three of his closest followers, Peter, James, and Paul, suffer for the faith and are martyred for the faith. And I don't know how any of these TV preachers can claim to have more faith than the Apostle Paul or Peter or James, Jesus' half-brother who led the church in Jerusalem. Most interesting, the Apostle Paul, the book of Acts says that the Apostle Paul had the ability to heal other people. But he himself, who is struggling with some kind of chronic illness, a sickness, something that was causing him a lot of discomfort and pain, he prays and asks the Lord to take that from him. And the Lord says, no, but I will give you grace sufficient to live with that disorder. So here's someone who can heal others, and he himself is not healed of his physical ailment in this lifetime. Not because he lacks faith, but because suffering is the common lot of all humans, even Christians, even followers of Jesus. In fact, we should expect suffering because we know what Jesus himself endured. So Jesus suffered death, humiliation. He suffers the worst death probably human beings have ever devised, which is the cross. And it is said in our hymns, in our liturgy, in the scriptures themselves, that Jesus pays the ultimate price for our salvation. But the idea of paying a high price has sometimes misled some Christians into taking that thinking in strange directions. There were some medieval Christians who thought that Jesus was somehow actually paying a ransom to Satan, as if he owed Satan something in order to set us free. Nothing could be further from the truth. Jesus trampled down the enemy, conquering death by death. He did not pay Satan anything, except maybe his recompense. Sometimes there is this bizarre idea that Jesus is paying God the Father in order for God the Father to love us. And so sometimes the thinking goes like this: God is angry, mad, and is full of wrath, and he needs his son to be murdered in order for him to change his mood and love us. That is not what John 3:16 says. John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his son. It's not that he so hated the world, he was so angry at the world, but he gave his son because he loved the world. And he gives of himself, he gives up something of himself because of how much he loves the world. Now, it is true that the Bible speaks of God's wrath. God is angry. It's God's rightful reaction to sin and brokenness and death and suffering and the evil that contaminates the world. But God's sacrificial love is the answer to God's wrath. Not in the sense that they're opposed to each other, because if we think that Jesus is somehow causing God the Father to love us, then we have a divided Trinity. We don't have a united God. But Jesus and the Father are completely one in heart and spirit and in will. And so what Jesus does is an expression of God the Father's love for us. So here's a good way of thinking about Jesus paying the high price. I think about first responders, some of whom have given their lives, rushed into burning fires, gone to scenes of car accidents, have gone into areas of danger, and they've paid a high price to rescue and redeem the people they came to save. Sometimes I think about people like athletes or musicians who pay a high price in order to accomplish something. You know, David Goggins, who put himself through physical hell to accomplish amazing things physically, or somebody like B.B. King, who practiced 5-6 hours a day to be a master of his craft. I also think maybe of parents who pay a high price for the sake of their children. In fact, most good parents are going to give up a lot of things. They're going to give up their personal time. They're going to give up some of their own interests. They're going to give up money. They're going to give up maybe health and other kinds of things. They're going to pay a high price in order to help their children make it to adulthood in a healthy way. These are metaphors. These are angles. These are analogies that help us get some understanding. But when we say that Jesus paid the ultimate price, it did cost something of God to redeem us. It was a high price. It cost God greatly to save this world from sin and death. And in that sense, Jesus paid the ultimate price for you and me.